welcome everyone to writing for BattleTech and Shadowrun. How is everyone's GenCon going so far? It barely started, so I expected more enthusiasm and excitement.
Have you been in the dealer's hall?
Unfortunately, yes, I haven't. It is slammed, yeah, so I get it. To introduce myself, yeah, no, it does feel like, actually I feel like this is day 3 of Gen Con. I've been here since Tuesday, and it feels like the con has been going for 3 days. To introduce myself really quickly, I'll be very loosely guiding this conversation. My name is Bryan Young. I write BattleTech and Shadowrun, big surprise. Yeah, those are my qualifications to be on this panel. To my left is Katherine Monasterio.
You're not going to do it?
Do you want to do it?
I'd love to do it.
Okay.
Don't take my voice from me.
I was going to introduce everybody with very lovely things to say, but no, go ahead.
You can introduce me.
Oh, well, what if people want to say that? Okay,
No.
Hi,
time
I'm
has
just giving
passed.
Bryan shit because that's kind of what I do. My name is Katherine Monasterio. I'm an editor for BattleTech and Shadowrun and sometimes Leviathan. Whatever. Also sometimes a writer of Shadowrun, so that's cool. I've edited a lot of Bryan's stuff, so if you want to rag on it, now's the time.
Who's our mic?
Oh no, is it even on?
That's, I'm playing with settings. Go ahead.
Okay.
On the Day of the Dead, when the year 2 dies.
Okay.
There you go, I think that's better. Yeah.
I don't have a nameplate, but I'm Philip Lee. I'm the managing editor of Shrapnel. I've written for BattleTech and Shadowrun, and a little bit of this, a little bit of that, editing, writing, you name it, I've probably done it.
I'm Jennifer Brozek. I'm a full-time author, editor, and media tie-in writer. I am a brand new editor-at-large for Catalyst Game Labs, primarily focused on Shadowrun. I have written an award-winning BattleTech Young Adult series, and now, just recently, an award-winning Shadowrun. This book beat out Disney and Minecraft. I am stunned and pleased. So, and I'm also pleased to announce I am now the managing editor of a brand new Shadowrun magazine called Augment. Augment your life with Augment magazine, which will also have an open call soon.
So we'll also be joined soon by Michael A. Stackpole, who I'm sure many of you in this room are probably familiar with his work in both BattleTech and Shadowrun. Never, yeah, no, it's fine. Please tell him that. But he got stuck at the Catalyst booth, and you know how like moving in a place like this for a guy like him can be. So he'll be here momentarily and join us. But the first question I wanted to ask everyone here is, what got you started into writing BattleTech and Shadowrun? Or what was your entry into these worlds? And why don't we start with you, Jen?
I had just won the Silver Emmy for Shanghai Apocalypse, and I was having dinner with John Helfers and Terry Hughes, and this guy sat down next to us. And he said, "Do you write big stompy mechs?" I'm like, "Hell no." And he went, "Can you crash a mech? And then write me a story?" And I'm like, "That's doable." The person I was talking to was Jason Schmetzer. He is, at the time he was the new hotness and Jason Hardy was the old and busted, but I'm pretty sure everybody's old and busted at this time, because we're all old. So I started writing a young adult series on Battlecore that became the Nellis Academy Incident, which was the first one to win a Scribe Award. So that's how I got into writing BattleTech. Writing Shadowrun, I did fluff on 2072 because I live in the Seattle area. And there is Mike Stackpole.
Hello.
I'll remember that.
Hello. Do you want to introduce yourself?
After that, I don't think I need to.
He really really does need no introduction. It's Mike Stackpole. So that's actually how I got into writing fiction for BattleTech and Shadowrun.
Do you want to take it next, Mike? How did you get into writing BattleTech and Shadowrun?
Well, let's see. Shadowrun, I was at FASA. I'd come up because they wanted me to design the Renegade Legion role-playing game. But so I was there for a number of several days, and Jordan Wiseman said, "Oh yeah, we're doing this other game. It's called Shadowrun," and he gave me this basic rundown of it. And rules hadn't been written yet. I mean, no art, nothing. And I went back home, and Shadowrun was just playing in the back of my mind. So I went back home on like a Thursday. Friday night, went out to a pub. Folk music was playing, stuff like that. I was not paying attention to anything because I got this image in my brain of a Rolls Royce, the grill of a Rolls Royce, and you know how it's got that winged figure, right? But what I saw was a raven. And so you have the RR, and it's like, Richard Raven, this is obvious. And from there I went, and the next day, the Saturday, I wrote the first Wolf and Raven story and sent it off. So I was writing Shadowrun fiction before Shadowrun had a game, which actually annoyed some of the developers. As for BattleTech, again, you know, at that time, in the late 80s, because Dragonlance had been so successful, game companies were beginning to look at doing novels. And they had, I think, Decision at Thunder Rift was out, and I saw them at Origins and said, hey, you know, if you're looking for any other novels, you know, I've written a novel, because I had written a fantasy novel. And they quite rightly, guy I was talking to quite rightly looked at me like, oh God, another game designer who thinks he can write. Okay. That pained expression you can only imagine. And but we chatted back and forth. And they said, sure, we'd like to write some stuff for Renegade Legion. So I sent them samples of the novel. They sent me no Renegade Legion stuff because they had nothing yet. But they sent me a bunch of BattleTech stuff. Then they called me up on the phone. Ross Babcock called me up on the phone and said, hey, enjoyed the sample of your novel. I'd like to read the rest of it. And I said, that's great. I really enjoy all the BattleTech stuff that you sent me. If you ever need any BattleTech stuff, let me know. I got a couple of ideas. And Ross, who is very deadpan in delivery for pretty much everything, said, that's what we want to talk to you about. We want you to do a trilogy. You've got 9 months to do 300,000 word novels. Can you do it? And when you're a freelancer, you know, it's yes, and you have to do the job. No, and you get absolutely nothing. So I said, sure, piece of cake. And then we literally came to GenCon and you know, hashed out, I'd had a basic outline, we chatted about some stuff, and that was that.
Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, 10.5. Yeah.
So I feel like my entry was pretty straightforward in that I've been writing seriously toward publication ever since I was in 8th grade. Like that's when I knew that I wanted to be like a writer. And I was just writing short stories, writing novels, was just not really getting anywhere with like queries to agents and anything. And I was kind of almost to the point where I was like, didn't really want to give up, but like the bug for writing was still there, so I couldn't let it go entirely. And I think I went to my game store and realized, oh, they're still making Shadowrun or BattleTech books. And so I got one of the books I didn't have yet, and I flipped to the back, and there's an ad for battlecore.com. And I was like, oh, maybe we could try writing a BattleTech short story. So I did that, and I wrote it, and sent it to another friend who was a really good BattleTech fan. And he gave me some pointers, and I sent the story in, and I got an acceptance letter from that. And I was like, oh, okay, so I guess I'll write another one. So I wrote another one, and I think it's like 3 or 4 stories that first year, and then eventually ended up to be basically being the associate editor of BattleCore, and that just it just snowballed. So now I'm running Shrapnel magazine, and writing novels, novellas, like whatever they want.
As for me, you know how there's always like those out-of-touch older people who are like, just go into a business and tell them you want to work there. Well, anyway, I went into a business and told them I wanted to work there. Like literally 10 years ago, I saw John Hilfers, one of the editors, on a panel, and I was trying to get into editing, and I knew I was good at it, I just didn't have a place to put it. And I literally said, so how do I get a job like you? And he said, come with me. And he took me to the Catalyst booth and set me up with one of the guys who, I guess they were in the market for editors, but they sent me, the editing test, and apparently I did all right, because 10 years later I'm still doing stuff for him. So anyway, yeah, apparently the old people were right from that school.
So for me, getting into writing BattleTech, I'd been writing other stuff, writing original work, and had been doing some other stuff in licensed universes. I wrote a whole bunch of fiction for the Robotech role-playing game, and had known Mike for a while, and Mike had introduced me to the Catalyst guys, and John Helfer, who's the fiction director at Catalyst. And Mike had introduced me to John, and John's like, well, what would you want to do? And I was like, I really love Shadowrun. I liked BattleTech. I played BattleTech plenty, but I knew much more about Shadowrun at the time. And he's like, Shadowrun's full. How about BattleTech? And I was like, well, I guess I could learn BattleTech too. I could learn that more. And that was that. I've written some Shadowrun, but nowhere near as much BattleTech, but nowhere near as much as BattleTech, and haven't really looked back. We went back and forth on a whole bunch of stuff. Actually, like, it was interesting when I was going to start writing BattleTech, there were a whole bunch of projects that never came to fruition that got greenlit. So at first, it was going to be a whole bunch of like Jihad era stuff, because that was where the universe was at the time, and there wasn't a whole lot of fiction in it. And I'd sent a whole bunch of pitches, and some of them got rejected, and some of them got accepted. And then as soon as that happened, John was like, no, we're gonna do a different thing. And then he teamed Mike and I up. Mike and I were going to co-write like a Kellhounds trilogy, and it was going to start when Calandra Kell sort of gave the scatter order to the Hounds, and Mike and I were going to go off and write our little adventures of the other Kellhounds units, the splitter units that kind of left elsewhere, which we are kind of doing now on our own.
Yeah.
And originally, this was way before Hour of the Wolf came out, we were going to have our part of the story where Calandra Kell actually was the one who was going to show up and kill Malvina Hazen on Terra. Obviously, that didn't happen. And then that story got canceled too, and that didn't happen. And then I put in some more pitches, and John was like, yeah, we like these. And just as I was about to start writing them, and he sent contracts out, he was like, whoa, hold up. We're having this big creative summit. We're going to do something else. We're going to move the universe forward. This was before Hour of the Wolf came out still. We're going to
2019.
The 2019 summit comes out. And I'm not invited to the summit because I still haven't actually written a single word of BattleTech. I have done so much work researching, working with Mike, doing pitches. And that's one thing they don't tell you as a freelancer is like, when they're like, yeah, sure, pitch me something, all of that is unpaid work.
Yeah.
So finally, they have the Creative Summit, and right after the Creative Summit, it's like September 2019, I get a call from Mike. And Mike goes, so, good news is I got you on the board for a book, and it's the first book coming out leading up to the Oakland era. The bad news is this book comes out in January. How much do you know about the Jade Falcons? And I'm like, well, I just spent all of the last 3 years researching Kellhounds and the Jihad era and the Word of Blake. Not much. Well, get started. And here's what your book is about. And I don't think the outline ended up getting approved till January, but that book came out in August 2020, which was a little late, but that was when my first BattleTech book came out. Before I get into the next question, I do have one more announcement to make. Obviously, you can tell that Phil is not John Helfers. John Helfers couldn't get away from the Catalyst booth because he's that busy, but he wanted to let everyone know that he will be doing an AMA session in the Atlanta room Sunday at noon. And that'll be a free thing. You don't need tickets or anything. You can just go in and see him Sunday at noon in the Atlanta room.
I'll be sitting on that too.
Phil will be sitting on that too, and so you'll be able to see the stark contrast between them.
I don't know, he may rope me into that as well.
Yeah, who knows who he's going to bring into that at all.
What hotel is the Atlanta room?
I have no idea. They gave me this
it's like right
paper.
there.
Oh, it's across the hall.
Across the hall.
Yeah. I was going to say, they just handed me a paper that said Atlanta. It could be in Georgia for all I know.
All of the Writer Symposium is
Yeah.
basically in this hallway in Georgia.
I'm going to ask one more question to the panel, but then I want you all to think about the questions you have, because I think a lot of this is about the questions you all have. But I want to ask everyone here on the panel, for you all, particularly Jen and Phil, because you're taking in Slush, what makes a good story in these universes for you? Like, what is it that defines a good story here? If you two want to start, then Mike and Katherine, I want to hear your answers too.
So for me, I've been a full-time editor. I've edited 25 anthologies. The 26th is Shadowrun, Magic, Machines, and Mayhem that is out to the Kickstarter people soon, and then everybody can buy it. A good story for me is, well, one, it is intrinsically, for Shadowrun and BattleTech, it is intrinsic in the writing, that you know the world. You're not just pasting numbers on a cyberpunk story, or you're not, you don't have a Robotech game that you played in, and then you're just sort of putting it in BattleTech terms. For me, you have to know it, and I just read a short story from Bryan Steele that I just came away from it going, the character is definitely a Shadowrunner, he's totally fragged, I was smiling through the entire story. But you have to also know how to begin, middle, and end your stories as well. A lot of people don't actually know how to do those. That's most people I say, drop the first 2 pages and then actually start your story, but that's how I go.
So what I look for in a story is, I like a story that is centered around as like real of a character as you can get. Because I like to see a character that has very clear motivations and goals and is well-rounded, and like you get to know that person and you want to see them succeed.
Or you want to see them fail.
Or you want to see them fail if it's that kind of story. But the character needs to be like compelling and at least like relatable in some sense. Because I've gone through multiple stories where, you know, the actual like the plot might be fine, but if you can take the character and just literally like lift them up out and put in just someone else, it's literally just a name swap. That's not a very compelling story, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there are stories that can work like that if you're writing kind of like an everyman sort of character, but by and large, like what's more compelling are the characters where it's like they might talk about their family or you know about their history, like something that's personal to that character you can like latch onto. You're like, yes, I want to see them do well, or
when Mike writes a Wolf and Raven story, you know it's a Wolf and Raven story from the get-go, and that is something that is it's part of your ethereal voice, and it's also part of your style of writing. So, yeah, living characters, and perfect characters are boring. Give me an obstacle. Let me root for them to overcome it, and be sad for them when they don't overcome it, or it's a spirit victory.
Yeah, another thing I look for is it's not necessarily a requirement for every single story, but I think some of the best, most successful stories are when the character at the end of the story is changed from when you started. So if it's like
there's no actual character arc. It's not usually as compelling of a narrative as when like you get to the end of the story and like they've learned something, or maybe they failed to learn something and they're like, you know, doomed to repeat it, you know, that sort of thing. But it's just having that character arc can also be very important.
Mike, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You want characters that, you want characters that have an internal growth arc. They have something that they're going to resolve. I mean, historically, with series characters, you're doing a series of stories, that growth arc is going to unfold over that series of stories. So in any individual story, they're not going to grow very much, but you're going to want to begin to see that growth as they're going through. If a character is going to only be in one book, they're going to be the focus of that book, you want them to have this impactful growth arc, because you want the character to be different in the end than they were in the beginning. And you want the readers to be able to follow that, and it appears logical. However they grow, they face challenges, this is what conditions them, this is what they learn to overcome, and this is why they become what they are at the end of the book, as opposed to what they were in the beginning of the book. There, you know, take BattleTech for example. I mean, a staple part of BattleTech is we're going to have big stumpy robots blowing the crap out of each other. All right, and that is there. But you know, I will tell you, based on my experience, nobody comes up to me and says, "Oh man, you know, the battles you did in this book were so much better than the battles you did in the next book." Instead, it's like, "Oh my God, are you going to torture Victor anymore? Can you torture Victor anymore?" Some of them wanted to torture Victor more. You know, others were, and this is, by the way, for the people who hated Victor, this is why when we got to the Republic of the Sphere, Victor was the only one that had survived. Everybody else, because I knew there were going to be a lot of people that just hoped he had died, you know, really early on. It was like, nope, him I want alive. He can be 105, you know.
The thing is, like I already stabbed him through the chest with a katana.
Yeah.
What more do you want?
Well, there you go. Yeah. You know, and I think those are really cool things. You know, in the Wolf and Raven stories, because again, those characters are going to be going over a lot of stories, right? There's not a lot of growth in each individual one, but there's generally going to be a character in those stories that they're helping out that does go through that radical growth arc. And the reason you need that emotional element if you're writing is because emotions engage the reader on an utterly unconscious level. You know, and really just sink talons into their hearts. And that way you have those readers forever. They may not know what's going to be in your next story, but they know it's going to tug at their heartstrings. And they will get that full emotional ride. And that's, like I say, it keeps them coming back. You know, that's why you have careers.
It's one of the things when you're writing BattleTech. Nellis Academy Incident, it's a one-off book. It will break your heart if you haven't read it. It will absolutely rip you to pieces by the end. I know this based on the number of people who have come and told me, "Oh my God, I cannot believe you did that." When I wrote the Rogue Academy trilogy, after I wrote the first book, people came up to me like, "If you kill Lyric, I'm going to be so mad at you."
I was one of them, and I was editing Secrets.
That's true. And it's just like, you want people, whatever story, novel or short story, you want people invested, and you want them to understand why they want what they want. Like in your Cato Clubs,
Cato Club, yeah.
yeah, the main character, you know what they want. There's several things they want. So.
But yeah, well, that's true. I agree with everything said here, and I think the fundamental thing to take away from is that no matter what universe you're writing in, the fundamentals of story crafting still need to apply. And anybody who I've edited in BattleTech and Shadowrun can probably attest to me hammering on structure, character arc. They have to be there. And the simplest way, if you come to any of my workshops, you'll probably hear me hammer on this too, but the simplest way to do a character arc is take an inner demon for your character, have them overcome it, and then have them use that overcoming to defeat the external antagonist. That's the simplest way to do it, and it informs the whole story. But yeah, as long as the fundamentals are in play, it's going to be a good story, no matter what the subject is, no matter what universe it is.
For me, one of the big things along those veins is to make sure that the choices that the characters make actually affect the outcome of the story.
Listen to this man.
You know, like Phil said, like if you can just replace the character and put someone else in there, like their choices aren't affecting the story. So that's a big thing. The other thing, like talking about BattleTech and Shadowrun specifically, for BattleTech, one of the things I don't want to see is necessarily like, I don't want to see dice rolls in the battles.
Yeah.
I literally told someone that.
I've been reading Slosh for Shrapnel, and it's like I just my eyes glaze over when I can see the dice rolls in the stories. For Shadowrun, I think one of the things for me when I'm reading a Shadowrun story is like my eyes glaze over when it doesn't embrace the two things that it's made up of, right? Like Shadowrun is fantasy and cyberpunk, and when it doesn't mix both of those, where it takes the hopefulness of fantasy or the heroes, the heroic business of fantasy, and the anti-authoritarianism of punk, the stories don't work as well for me. And there's plenty of cool Shadowrun stories that are very pulp and very awesome, and they're very cool heists, and people enjoy them, but for me, I much prefer the more like anti-authoritarian, fantasy quest sort of versions of Shadowrun. That's sort of my view of it. But there's tons of different flavors of each of those. The thing I love about Shadowrun and BattleTech is that there are so many different flavors of it. You can skin it in so many different ways. You can tell a horror story in BattleTech. You can tell a horror story in Shadowrun. You can tell a spy thriller in both of those universes. You can tell a romance story in both of them.
Yep.
Mike?
My very first romance was the Shadowrun at Kiss to Die For. I'd never written a traditional romance before.
I think everyone here should look up Hungry Like the Wolf. Huh? No, Hungry Like the Wolf, starring Alaric Ward. Seriously, on Big Red's YouTube channel, you want it. You want this. Mike wrote it, and Red, okay. Anyway, let's go open up for some questions. Let's go here. That's the first hand I saw.
So, like, when a universe starts to build with more and more writers showing up over the years, you get more characters being developed. How do you carefully introduce someone else's character into your storyline? Like, going about asking them, hey, can I do this with your character? How do you research timelines? Make sure that I'm not zipping this guy across the universe 1 week before he's supposed to have his epic moment over here. Like, what is like the generic process that you have to do and all that?
I think if anybody wants to jump in on this,
Sure.
there's a.
What I was just saying, like my advice, especially if you're writing like a Shrapnel short story, I would advise steering clear of named, well-known characters, because it's going to be a continuity nightmare for a fact-check team. And also, there's established characters. Like you need to like get on them. Like you need to hit like their personalities and everything, because they're very well established. And sometimes it's better to find, especially when you're starting out, especially with Shrapnel, with short stories, it's better to like find a niche that you want to work in and work with that, instead of, oh, I want to feature like a cameo of this well-known character. And if you do feature those kind of characters, they need to be like very secondary, tertiary to the actual story.
You got to remember,
if at all,
when you're working in a tie-in universe, like as Bryan was talking about, we've had developmental meetings. So in the past 5 years, we've had 2 developmental meetings. So we've plotted out where the universe is going to be in 5 years. All right? There is no way as a freelancer from the outside that you're going to know any of that stuff. So first, and I've done this with tie-ins I've done, you, as Phil was suggesting, you find that corner of the universe where nobody has done anything, you put your story there. You worry about perfecting your craft there before you worry about dragging anybody else's characters in. You can reference the history that's already out there. That's what you want to do, because that will anchor your story in that universe. Then, as you're getting published, as you're seeing how this begins to work, then you're going to get those opportunities maybe, cross-correlate things. I mean, Bryan and I, just last week, I shot Bryan a text saying, hey, by the way, X is now a fact in the universe. And Bryan says, okay, I know where I can slip that in.
And my response was actually, what the hell are you writing?
But, and working in tie-in universes, they always have continuity people. So you're not going to reach out just by yourself to an author, another freelancer, to try and tie stuff back and forth. Your job is going to be to go through who the publisher is, who the continuity person is, or the line runner for that, so that they can help coordinate that. Okay? You don't want to do it by yourself, because it's literally with BattleTech. I remember years and years ago, there was a young man in Montreal who wrote FASA and asked them to tell me to stop copying the novels that they had written on their own in my books. Now this is because they were reading the BattleTech books really, really closely, and they were seeing all the clues as to what was going to be going on. They were seeing all the foreshadowing. They wrote their own novels based on that foreshadowing. And when we dropped novels on top of what they were doing, they were like, wait a minute, they're reading my mind. And they may also have had other issues, but this is the problem when you're working in someone else's universe. You can do a perfect story, but if it's not going to follow what they do, you're stuck.
One of the things I would like to suggest to people who are going to write for Stackpole or Augment, and Augment's a little bit different because it's all going to be anonymous confessional. So you can pretend to be Harlequin and writing the confessional to the magazine. But my first suggestion is toss out your first 3 ideas. They're in the common mem. Write, start looking at the next 3, 4, 5 ideas, and then that's the story only you can write, because you have started thinking it through, going, oh, if I'm doing I did human tales, what would monsters tell, what cautionary tales would their monsters tell people about humans? I got 4 beautiful Rumpelstiltskin stories. I can take one. But it was because Once Upon a Time was on, and Rumpelstiltskin was a main character, and frickin' everybody loved him. And even if you never watched that, you saw the commercials for it, people referenced it. So think of your ideas, and then toss out your first 3. They're in the common mem. Unless you really, really, really love that story, then, all advice is opinion-based on the experience of the author. So that is my opinion.
I would say, back to your original question necessarily about how we organize some of that stuff, we have to rely on the fact check team. The fact check team's pretty good about being available to us, and they kind of know what's in development. The product developers know what's in development, and sometimes they will say, avoid this, or don't do that, or talk to this person. I was doing a proposal and they said, oh, that's gonna touch on what these folks over here are doing, go talk to them. So we set up a meeting and talked about that stuff over there as far as what characters were going. Or there was a situation where there's a source book that was coming out, and they knew that it was touching on some stuff I was doing, and they reached out to me and said, we know you're writing a book here, and it's going to touch this. Is there a character in that book that you could write something for us to put in the source book? So we don't have to invent something from whole cloth or step on your toes. Right now, I think BattleTech is in a really great place for cross-collaboration on that kind of stuff right now. And there's a lot of talking back and forth between the writers and the developers and the editors and stuff in a way that hasn't always been there, it seems.
And I will say that people have asked me to write more BattleTech, but right now I'm very focused on Shadowrun. So I have flat out told other BattleTech people, if you want to take Rogue Academy, Ritz's Revenge, and age them up and write a story, go for it. It's all yours, because when you write tie-in, even though I created the characters, I don't own them. Catalyst owns them. The BattleTech owns them. So when you write tie-in, you don't own what you write. But yes, there is a courtesy to say, hey Mike, I want to write a little thing that has a cameo of Wolf. What would he do in this situation?
Actually, in the case of Wolf and Raven, I do own those rights.
Oh.
They're different than contracts.
There are always exceptions, but so, I don't know. Let's pretend I was correct. I would say that I would ask about the cameo, and then I would kind of like send it the scene says is good, and then continue on with the rest of my story. So there is a custom and courtesy with it.
Okay, next question. Let's go right here.
So thinking about what you said about character arcs, if your goal was to write a series of short stories with a recurring character, how important is it that you have an arc within each short story as opposed to an overall arc between the series?
Happy to take it. I hate to say that both are important because that's so much work, but yeah, both are important. I'm thinking of a particular frame of a workshop I have this week, but there's a way you can phase it. Like think of Aragorn's arc from Lord of the Rings. If you consider it could be 100 different things, right? But if you focus on his internal demon as like fear of leadership, and granted, Lord of the Rings is not a good comparison for a short story, but if you count it as fear of leadership, and each one he kind of works through that in a different way until finally he's ready to take on being king. But it isn't. All of those small arcs feed into the larger one. So even in a short story, it doesn't have to be like the size or like the world-rocking scope of a character arc. But if we can still see little changes in them from start to finish as you build, that's preferred and ideal.
I mean, if you think about a movie with that 5-minute training montage in every movie, imagine everything you see in that training montage as a short story. So you're telling a complete short story about each of the little things that they're doing, but in the aggregate, over the series of those stories, you see the larger growth in that character. And so that's how you want to go ahead and approach it. Break it down into bite sizes. And in each one of those, he's only going to grow a little bit, but over the course of it, you get that massive change. And as Katherine was saying, earlier, the resolution of those stories are what allow the resolution of the overall story arc. So everything they learn there builds them up and equips them to allow them to solve this final issue.
Yeah, another thing to keep in mind too is that, especially when it comes with short fiction, sometimes follow-up stories aren't necessarily guaranteed. So if you start a character arc that doesn't actually finish in that first story, even if it's a standalone story, then if like the second story just doesn't measure up, or like the author never gets around to writing it, or they there's all number of things that can happen that prevent follow-ups from happening. Then you'll never like even get like a resolution of whatever arc was introduced in that first story. But if you have a tangible arc in that self-contained first story, then you'll at least have some resolution, even if no follow-up stories ever happen.
And I was just going to say real quick, I think it really is very, very helpful if you've got a character and you're going to do a series, even if you're not sure how many stories you want to do, roughly plot out, even if it's just taking an index card or a sheet of paper and saying, story 1, I want to do this, and make little one-line log lines for about 10 different stories, just so you have a vague idea. It may happen that as you're writing story number 4, and all of us, this just happened. This is part of the torture of our lives, right? Halfway through story 4, the character says, oh no, I'm not doing that. And all of a sudden, and a much stronger story when you follow the character where they want to go, but that may derail some of the things you were doing about in the future. But because you've been doing this stuff all the way along, you're going to see another future, and you'll just keep continuing that process. But projecting a future for those characters gives you a goal to shoot at. And that's really important to help you sustain energy and sustain direction. And so often, when you're trying to do a series, you're trying to do a really long piece, you lose that momentum or you lose that direction. So just go back, focus on those, and that'll help you get back through.
I would say Katie Ferraro's arc in her short stories in Shrapnel, the first story is very much just like her arc is like she wants a mech, she's going to figure out how to do that. And then the second one, like every story in those first 5 is just her building the ability to have a mercenary unit and be able to play on a larger field in the universe. And I didn't know I was going to be able to do more than one. I don't think I told Phil when I submitted the first one that I'd actually already written the next 5. I just, as soon as the first one was finished and people seemed to like it, I just sent the next one in. And then when the second one was published, I was like, oh, Phil, here's another one. And we did that for 2 years. But
people loved it.
yeah, no, people seem to like the Fox
Patrol.
Patrol.
Worked up into a whole serial novel. So.
Yeah, then we did the serial novel, and I just turned in a book, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, like all of those stories were very self-contained, because I didn't know if I was going to be able to get to do more, because if people weren't liking it, then what's the point in Phil publishing it? And, eventually overall, like it ended at the point where, yes, they could go off into the great unknown of the inner sphere and the world of actual mercenary work. And so it did create an overall arc, but there were all those mini arcs. So yes, you need to do the mini arcs. So, got a question here.
When pitching a story in universe, let's say you have your character arcs planned out, you got the setting, how it plugs into the universe, you're a little hazy on stuff like factions, what mechs to use. Is that something you want to flesh out, or is that something you'd send in the pitch letter and be like?
Most pitches don't have to be that granular. Mostly when we're looking at pitches, we're just looking at like does the story work? Are the characters there? And all the other like nitty-gritty research bits that can come later.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like my stories are dependent on like which factions they're in. Like if I were gonna write like without question and submitted it as like a combine story, people would be like, "What the hell is wrong with you?"
Yeah. We don't have like a list of like I'm going to use these mechs in this.
No, but they
novel
did add in the proposals that they're asking for, that John is asking for, like cover notes where they want us to pick a couple of mechs.
Yeah.
Just for ideas for the covers, and sometimes that's been changing, but like I've been finding I have to pick a couple of mechs at least at the beginning to just give an idea of the cover.
Yeah, and that's something you can use like master unit list for.
Yeah.
If you're trying to find like faction specific mechs, masterunitlist.info.
I kind of feel though, like we were talking about earlier, where like you've got to have your character specific stuff, where like if you remove the character, it's going to change the story. I kind of feel like all of the factions in BattleTech are kind of specific enough that if you were to set something in a different place, it's going to change the story pretty significantly though.
Yeah, I agree on that one.
Like I said, like something in the Combine is going to be drastically different than in the Capella Confederation, and neither of those are going to look the same as in the Federated Suns or Lyran Space or the Republic or...
Yeah, just from cultural difference alone.
Yeah. So that is something you might want to figure out beforehand, because it is going to shade like your characters, who they are, where they came from, and the government house machine they might be fighting against or with. Let's go in the back.
If you submit a story to Shrapnel and you get rejected, who owns it?
I mean, the rights revert back to the author because we don't have any legal rights to it. But since BattleTech is an owned IP, the author can't say, go publish it on Amazon under the BattleTech IP. What you can do is you can actually file off the serial numbers, revise it so that it's not a BattleTech story. There's nothing IP specific to it. And then I've seen people publish some stuff that way, or some people will just put it in the fan fiction forums.
Right.
That's another route, like, because there's some people who are just like, I don't really care about getting paid or getting published. I wrote this story, they enjoy it, and I want to share it with people. So it really just depends on like what you want to do with after.
And I know Shadowrun now has the hollow streets. 5 minutes, thank you. That has hollow streets where you can do your own thing, but you have to follow their rules.
So we've got one more in the back, and then you here in the pink, and then... Yes, you.
So, I was going to ask, are there any, this I guess for Shadowrun, any events or eras that are off limits, or that that they really want to see more of?
In what context? As novel, short stories?
Like in submissions, I guess.
So for Augment Magazine, it will be the 2080s. It will be as current as you can get, or you're currently telling a story that happened, you're confessing a story that happened 10 years ago. Okay. If you come to me and say, I want to write a novella, I will actually just listen to the pitch that you want. I want you to write the story you want to write. And then as an editor, I would help you make it fit into what is currently going on or what we see going forward with Shadowrun.
Yeah, and for Shrapnel, I'm open to pretty much any era, any faction. It really doesn't matter. I've published stories from like the Age of War all the way back from like the Outer Reaches Rebellion, which is like pre-Battle Mech even. I think the only thing that's really like verboten at the moment is anything in the clan homeworlds after the Wars of Revan. Like there's no one's even allowed to touch that.
Yeah, I guess basically don't try and write one of the big people and don't write a dragon. That's yeah. Don't try to write one of his Wolf and Raven stories.
Yes.
All right. Piggybacking on question 1 and 3, and actually a previous comment you had, how much research and fact checking personally is too much? And do you, all 5 of you, do you have any tips, like when you're doing your own research, fact checking?
I actually have some of my authors, especially like a lot of my recurring authors, what they'll do is they'll actually leave like little comments in their manuscript to say, hey, this is referencing something from like this source book, and even down to like the page that it came from. And our fact check team loves that. So I don't think there's anything like, there can't be too much. So as much ammunition as you want to give, like me as an editor, for example, or my slush readers, and the fact check team, like I'd rather err on the side of too much than not enough.
There's one caveat to that where I think it's too much research if you're researching and not writing.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't use it to avoid your story.
So basically, please write an apology.
We've got time for one more quick question. Yes.
If you're trying to introduce someone to either setting, which books would you recommend they start with?
Introductions for either setting. Everybody give one quick answer for both. Mike, what would you pick for introducing people to Shadowrun or BattleTech?
But BattleTech, probably the Blood of Kerensky series, I guess. Shadowrun, especially for the current era, I can't. I'm blanking.
I'm going to say Sprawl Stories 1, or if you want to go on the young adult, Auditions, because it gives you 4 different perspectives of getting kicked into or falling into the shadows. For BattleTech, actually, I actually think Shrapnel is actually what I would send them to.
Yeah, Shrapnel has like a pretty wide breadth because there's stories from all, like just, I know a lot of people that, like they love Shrapnel because it's literally just like,
grab bag.
Yeah, some miscellaneous stuff. So where it's like someone who really doesn't know a lot about it. There's a little bit from this era, and a little bit from this era, a little bit from like all these various factions and stuff. So it's a really good sampling.
I definitely do more BattleTech editing than Shadowrun. So in that regard, I would probably recommend Bryan's Fox Patrol series with Katie Ferraro. Wait, that's right, that's Fox Patrol, right? Yeah, okay, great. There's a lot it goes to. Anyway, but because Katie starts out like looking for a mech and then like slowly building a mercenary company, I feel like it really takes you a lot, like it world builds with you in a way that doesn't feel like world building, it's just storytelling, and it kind of helps you get a ground and all that. So yeah, good stuff.
That's my answer. Sure. Foxtails. Read Foxtails. That's what it looks like. Yeah, that's where I would start people there. Shadowrun has so many different entry points, though, whether it's the game or any of the video games, the video games are really great stories, actually, the way all the video games go. And then the live plays that they're doing online are great ways to introduce people into the Shadowrun world. The Shadowrun canon is a lot different than the BattleTech canon, if that makes sense, where it's just like, it's a little bit more modular, and there's a lot more ways into it. So we'll all be around the Catalyst booth. We have a signing for BattleTech and Shadowrun on, that's not on that schedule. Sunday at 11 and Friday at 4, I think?
No, Friday at 11, Saturday at 4.
Okay, Friday at 11, Saturday at 4 at the Catalyst booth for signings. And thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
You're all